We read this week Parshat Acharei Mot in the aftermath of the death of Aaron's children. This, of course, the reading as well on Yom HaKippurim. It describes the service of Yom HaKippurim when the Kohen would go individually on into the Kohen Gadol, the once a year, into the Kodesh HaKodashim, into the Holy of Holies. And I wanted to look at it a little bit today from a couple of different angles, starting with some sort of the psychological insight into the idea of Acharei Mot. Right? This is obviously a very difficult time for Aharon. Two of his sons have passed away. Two of his sons have died. There may be a sense of guilt. There are other places in the Torah which seem to imply that this was a punishment that was meted out to him as a result of the his participation, the building of the Egel Hazahav, the golden calf, the building an altar after the Egel Hazahav was created. It's a larger discussion about Aaron. I will at the same time say that there are other ways of looking at it, not as punishment to Aaron, but as they were taken because they were too close to God. And whatever way we want to look at it, it's certainly a traumatic experience, to say the least, for Aaron. And trauma doesn't disappear. The Parsha opens with the death of Nadav and Avihu. And God then restricts how Aaron can enter the Holy of Holies. God is not telling Aaron to move on. What he's doing in the system of being the Kohen Gadol is creating sort of boundaries around the trauma. Aaron can't just walk in whenever he wants. To access the Holy of Holies is rare. It has to be deliberate. It is controlled. It is at a particular time. And this is a truth about, after a traumatic loss, the goal isn't to erase the memory. It's how do we contain the memory safely, right? Unprocessed trauma, things are chaotic, intrusive. Things don't work out if you don't deal with it. When what the Torah is telling us here, and it doesn't always have to be ritualized in the Torah with Korbanot, obviously it's ritualized, but ritualized trauma becomes integrated and can become meaningful. And so the Yom Kippur service, which is described here, becomes a sort of a safe container, an easy space for confronting what is otherwise for Aharon very overwhelming. So just taking a step back and thinking about it. That's one sort of psychological aspect. Something else related to it, which when we think about, we've talked about this in different ways. Closeness to God can be dangerous when there are no boundaries. We talked a little bit last week about the idea of boundaries with Tazria and Metzora, the Tzara'at, as the Tzara'at appears for people who go beyond, boundaries. We talked about with Miriam not understanding the difference between her and Moshe, or Gehazi, the servant of the servant, the helper, the assistant, the associate of Elisha with Naaman, and they don't stay within their space and their boundaries, and so they get sarat. So is one of the ways of explaining why people get sarat, and also going back to the Har Sinai and the Mishkan. Har Sinai is God unadulterated, no boundaries. Right, that's why there had to be a fence around Sinai. The Mishkan has created a place with boundaries. God is only going to be, this is the Kodesh HaKodashim. It is sealed off with the curtain. You cannot go in there. Nadav and Avihu's mistake, and there are a number of different explanations given as to what their mistake is oftentimes thought of, framed as overenthusiasm, getting too close to God. And the corrective message to Aaron is almost counterintuitive. Holiness requires distance. It's not just something that comes about through a passion. And think about it just sort of like generally in life. right? There are times in relationships filled with passion. There are times in relationships you have to give people a certain amount of space, a certain amount of distance, even, the things you want to accomplish in life, personal ambition. There are times that you have to sort of take a step back and distance yourself. Too much intensity without structure, without being deliberate, without being thoughtful, can lead to a collapse. And so, right, I think here, what's being said is there's an idea of coming close to God, but to make it healthy, there have to be limitations. There needs to be preparation. The time has to be right. You can't just barge in a sense, if we want to think of it as such, the barging in of our own sons, Nadav Avihu. And right, it reminds us of another episode in the Tanakh that's related to it, which is of course Esther. Esther is super worried about barging in to the palace of Achashverosh, the throne room, we'll call it, of Achashverosh, like his inner sanctum. And obviously, we talked about this when we talked about the book of back in Megillat Esther, right? It's obviously supposed to be like the Beit HaMikdash, the description of um, the palace in Shushan, and that's what she's worried about, is barging in not at the right time. And she goes about preparing, not preparing to get Achashverosh ready, but to sort of, right, we're going to fast for 3 days, me and my girls, and you should as well. And she puts on Big Day Malchut, and she does things to prepare herself. Closeness requires certain thoughts, preparations. You can't just barge in. Unbound passion can be destructive. And we have a similar notion when we think about the two goats. We'll talk a lot about the two goats. Maybe tomorrow we'll talk more about the two goats. But one interesting way of looking at the two goats, right? We know that one of them is for Hashem and one of them is for Azazel. One is thrown off the cliff, the scapegoat, the more well-known one, and the other one is sacrificed in the temple and becomes a carbon. And relating it back in a way, and there's more to it. The two goats, I think, go back to Yitzchak and Yishmael, and we'll talk more about that tomorrow. But rather than pretending that all of our impulses are holy, that everything we think about, that everything we want to do, that everything we desire, that everything our passions are for, it's not always the case. One goat is elevated, is La Hashem, and one is La Azazel. One is sent away. And it's sort of working away from the extremes. On the one hand, we have, an idea of total repression, right? And on the other one, we have, let's say, complete indulgence, right? On my impulses, this is what I am. This is what comes into my brain. I have to say everything. We all should have at least some filters, certain things we shouldn't say. I appreciate you guys not saying comments about what I'm saying today. And there are people who think I'm all my impulses and everything I want and everything, and that's what I'm going to do. And there are others just the opposite. I'm going to repress everything. The Torah doesn't say that. The Torah oftentimes walks the middle of the road. I'm going to acknowledge some of my thoughts, some of my ideas, some of what I want to do is not correct, but it doesn't define who you are. So the Azazel goat could represent certain impulses, guilt, ill-conceived thoughts. And we don't destroy them internally. We externalize them. We remove them. It's a form of sort of regulating our emotions. So one, we send away. We don't deny it. And that's not who I am. I understand that's a piece of who I am, but I can move past it. And so we have the Sa'ir La Azazel, the Sa'ir La Hashem, representing sort of the two different emotional, psychological ways that we can think about things. Let's turn to one more idea. It says, "Bizot yavo Aharon el hakodesh," and this phrase "bizot" is an interesting word. Is an interesting word, and there's a wonderful midrash about bizot, which talks about all of the other places that it says bizot. Vizot HaTorah, right? There are many places where it's not just Bizot Yavo Aharon El HaKodesh, but the Midrash talks about how there are many other places where the word Zot comes in, and Aaron is coming into the Holy of Holies with the holiness of Vizot HaTorah and the Zot that many others before him or during his lifetime or later on his descendants, what they will be coming in. He's coming in with all of the glory of Bnei Yisrael. Other places where the phrase comes up, and this is not in this midrash, but right. For example, back in the book of Shmot. God says, "Bezot teda ki ani Hashem." Through the miracles that I will do, you will know that there is a God. Zot is not only about the the mitzvot through which and the deeds that we have done that are correct, that Aaron goes with those things to the Kodesh HaKodashim, but it also in places in the Torah, it introduces sort of a powerful encounter between a God and another entity. Right? Through these miracles, Moshe, you're going to see that I am God. Paro is going to see that I am God. Through this encounter, Aaron and Aaron's descendants, when they go in to the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippurim, are going to see something that is tremendous. And so access to something overwhelming, to God's overwhelming dynamic power isn't direct. It comes through a structure, and God is saying, like, this is the structured way in which it's going to happen. And Zot is like this linguistic barrier that in certain places is introducing it. In a way, we have sort of like the phrase Ko Amar Hashem in later prophetic books that when before there's a Ko Amar Hashem, God is about to say something very very significant. One of the other phrases that's used here is right, velo yamut, is if Aaron does these things, then he will not die, which is part of the entire aspect of what is going on here. What is being set up is a situation where Aaron will be able to go to the Holy of Holies, go to the Kodesh Kodashim, but lo yamut. That's not what's going to happen. If unlike his sons. And so there's a lot that's going on here. We have to think about, this is obviously introduced this way, Acharei Mot. It's after the death of Aaron, and one of the ways of really understanding it is through that lens of Acharei Mot. Let me mention one last thing. It's 2:15 by you, 12:15 by me. It's the day before Yom HaZikaron in Israel. It's already Yom HaZikaron. Day we remember the fallen soldiers of Israel. The numbers, I believe, at this point, just in the last 2 years, because of all of the wars and the battles, is I think over, or maybe it's all time in Israel, 25,000. I saw a number placed out there, and sometimes we have a double parsha, Acharei Mot Kedoshim, and you put the two parshiot together, and right, what does it mean, Acharei Mot Kedoshim? After the death of the holy. Yom HaShoah is usually at this time, and we think of Acharei Mot Kedoshim, after the death of the holy ones, after the death of the Kedoshim, the holy ones who were murdered in the Holocaust, and certainly on Yom HaZikaron, on Yom HaAtzmaut, when we think about the state of Israel and everything that's happened, it's impossible not to think about Acharei Mot Kedoshim. It's impossible not to think about these two parshiot when they are placed together, or in the years when they are on separate dates, that we all owe so much as individuals and as a people to those who have served country of Israel, those who have served the people of Israel, Bnei Israel, through their sacrifice as Kedoshim. And so we remember them especially on Yom HaZikaron, but obviously, truly, we remember them each and every day.